Welcome back, everybody, to the Not So Perfect podcast. My name is Colton Daly. I am your Not So Perfect host. And as always, I just want to start by saying I'm super blessed that you're here listening to my words. It's just always my heart and my intentions that you get something amazing from these episodes. And I hope that this podcast and some of my words may be a blessing to you. That's why I do it. I'm here to share my story, my experience, my journey with you to hopefully make yours a lot better. That's the intention of this podcast. I just always want to let you know that whatever you want to do in life, whatever your dream is, whatever your purpose is, you don't have to be great to get started, but you got to get started to be great. There's no such thing as perfection, man. And if you stay committed, if your heart's in it, you have faith and trust that you'll get there, you'll get there. So today's episode, really, I just want to share my story with y'all. And the point being is that, man, we all go through adversity. We all go through heartbreak. We all go through difficult, hard, challenging, struggling times. And some of those times nearly break us, bring us to our knees, make us want to quit. But I hope that my story in this podcast gives you hope, gives you some tools and some perspective shifts that if you are going through those times, and as we know, life is a journey of peaks and valleys. That's inevitable. It's going to happen. People we love are going to perish. Things we have are going to be lost, but there's always a blessing in it. There's always a beauty in the struggle. And so I'll share with you my entire story, hopefully here in the next 15, 20 minutes, that would radically shift your perspective when you go through some of these difficult times. So if you guys happen to catch the first episode of this podcast ever, the intro, I briefly explained to you a bit of my journey of how I lost my brother and father and my godfather within a 6-7 month time frame. So just to give you a quick recap of that, my senior year of college, well, first of all, my brother went through a 10-year addiction with opiates. And, man, he was my hero, man. I mean, this guy was a legend. His name was Chaz. He was a ladies' man. He was captain of the football team. He was my protector, went to the military, basic training, graduated top 3 out of 1,000. So I definitely admired him. It was very tough watching him struggle and deal with this addiction, not to mention what something like that does to the family, with the pain and the suffering and all the things that go with addiction, if you're familiar with it. So senior year, I came home July weekend of my college to visit my family. Long story short, my brother wanted to go out. I told him I'd go out with him. I couldn't that night. I changed my mind. A day or two later, I ended up finding him dead in a hotel bed to an overdose. All right. Now, the unfortunate part about this is about 6 months previous, my father had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. And the doctor said it was a kidney stone. He didn't double check it, ended up being bladder cancer. So I watched my father, who meant the world to me, go from a 250-pound man to a 150-pound man. And after losing my brother 6 months later, on the day of my college graduation, my father died. And then a month later, my godfather died, my last remaining mentor. Right? Now, the reason I share this with you is not to make this a sad podcast, but to let you know that, man, I went through some shit. I went through a very dark, depressing time in my life. 22 years old. I don't even know if I can consider myself a man yet. I was just beginning life, trying to figure out what my journey was. And then right off the bat, graduated college, I get smacked with probably the darkest season I'll ever have to go through my life, Lord willing. But I wanted to share this story with you because I know that each of us go through hard times in life. So if you're struggling with the heartbreak or loss, adversity, I kind of want to run through this story for you and some of the events that proceeded afterwards that changed me, that changed who I was. Because that journey I went through made me the man I am today. It gave me the purpose I have today. So shortly after losing my brother and father, about 6 months after, I jumped out of college. I was blessed to, through some connections, get a job, doing some sales for a software engineering company. I was miserable. I wasn't using my gifts at the time. I didn't feel like I was in purpose. I was super depressed after everything that had just gone down. And I just remember sitting there one day being like, man, is this all there is to life as I'm at this desk? Like, is this it? Is this what I'm going to do forever? Right? Make good money, but be miserable day after day. And I had realized how short life is at this moment. I mean, I just lost my brother. I just lost my father. My brother was only 29 years old. And as I was having these thoughts that night, I went home and I had a dream. All right? And to preface this dream, my family and I, all 4 of us, in that last year before everyone, 90% of my family had passed away, we started going on cruises. and we loved them, 3 or 4 cruises. So in this dream, my brother was in it. My father was in it. My mother was in it. And we were on a cruise ship, and we were sitting at the table at the side of the cruise ship, kind of overlooking the water. To my right was my brother. My left was my mother. And to her left was my father. And I was looking at my brother in this dream. He had his shirt off. He was so happy. And it was one of those dreams where I knew it was a dream, but I didn't care. I was in my brother's presence again. And he was so happy. And I was so happy just to sit there and look at him, to appreciate him and to admire him. And man, he was giggling. I was making fun of him because he was a little chubby. He was giggling about it because he was eating a chocolate bar at the moment. And as I'm starting to have this realization that this moment can't last because it is a dream, I started to realize, man, you can't stay, Chaz. Like, you're going to have to go. And the moment I had this realization in the dream, the scene switched. And all of a sudden, it was just my brother and I, and we were in this little kitty corner, in this little corner section of this wall, and his back was against the corner, and I was right in front of his face trying to let him know, Chaz, you can't stay here. You have to go. But he wasn't paying attention to me. He was looking around me. He was looking above me. He was all giddy and happy, and as I kept telling him, you can't stay, I started getting frustrated because he was goofing off. And so I thought I'd get his attention, and I mustered up a ton of strength, took my 2 hands, and I just slammed him right in his chest. And I remember as soon as I did that, man, my older brother, who I had a healthy fear of growing up, man, he looked me right in the eyes with these fearful eyes, which I immediately knew I was about to catch an ass whooping. But nonetheless, I got his attention. And as I looked at him in his eyes, I said, you cannot stay. He grabbed me by my shoulders, looked me dead in the eyes, and says, Colton, I need you to Google the name Gary Walker. And in that moment, I woke up. Now, you can imagine, as I'm waking up, I am shook, man. I just had a dream with my brother who had passed away. Not only that, my brother looked me dead in my eyes, grabbed me by my shoulder, and told me to Google a man's name, Gary Walker. Now, I had never met a Gary Walker in my life. I didn't even know a lot of Garys. So, I run out, and my mom's in the kitchen. I'm like, Mom, do you know a Gary Walker? She's like, no idea. So I go to work that day at this job I was quite miserable at. All I can think of is, who the heck is Gary Walker? I'm Googling it, can't really find anything. And at the end of this day, I'm on YouTube, and I'm like the 3rd or 4th page, and I find a YouTube video that says, Brother Gary Walker shares his testimony. It's about a 2-hour video. So as I leave work, I had an hour drive home. I was heading to the gym. Started listening to this man's testimony and who he is. Brother Gary Walker is the lead pastor and founder of a church in Australia. And I began to listen to his story. And he tells about how there was a day. This guy was raised in the church. He built the church. He spent his whole life. He stayed away from sin. He tried to be a righteous man. And he had 2 daughters and a beautiful wife. And there was a day where he was going to do some outreach, some ministry to feed some homeless or whatever he was doing. And one of his daughters joined him with his wife. And as they're getting in the car to drive there, the daughter goes, Dad, do you want me to sit on the left side of the car or the right side? And Gary's like, you've never asked me that. I don't care. Why don't you just go ahead and sit on the right side? And as they're on the way to this ministry, a box truck comes flying down the road, loses control, and slams the left side of the car. Now, if his daughter was sitting on the left side, she would have been killed immediately at impact. Gary and his wife were severely injured. Gary spent many months in a coma. Doctors didn't know if he'd recover. His wife was pretty injured as well, but not as bad as Gary. And now throughout this journey, 7-8 months of being in the hospital, recovering, Gary said, man, I finally questioned God. Like, God, why? Why me? Why would you allow this to happen to me? All I've ever done was be good to you. I've lived my life to be a righteous man. I founded a church. I've been leading your people. I've been doing ministry. After everything I've done, you'd really let this happen to me? And Gary said at that moment when he asked the Lord that, he said it was the first time in his entire life he heard the audible voice of God speak back to him. Not the internal monologue in your head, but he said that he heard the audible voice of God. And in that moment, God spoke to Gary and said, Gary, if you knew the plans I had for you, you would have volunteered for this. If you knew the plans I had for you, you would have signed up for this. And as I was at the gym, I remember I was on one of those ab machines, the leg lifts. I heard those words and I just fell off the machine. My entire body lit up with goosebumps. because I know that was the message my brother gave me, that God came to give me through my brother. Right? Now I'm sitting on this podcast. Now I'm a life coach. Now I'm a motivational speaker and the strongest encourager you'll ever meet because of what I went through. So I don't know whatever you went through, but what I do know is oftentimes our pain will lead us directly to our purpose. And if you knew the plans that God had for you, whatever your struggle is, whatever your trial and tribulation is, perhaps you would sign up for it if you knew the bigger picture. So when my brother passed away, I was offered an opportunity to speak at his celebration of life, to speak on his behalf. Now, I have never done any motivational speaking. I'd never done any preaching. I'd never done any public speaking. And in that moment, I made a decision. Do I want to do this? I know how challenging it's probably going to be. I mean, honestly, I just thought, man, I know my brother would do it for me, so I'll do it for him. And I remember going and sitting at the Starbucks by the house, and I was trying to prep a speech, and I just remember this scripture I read in the Bible when Paul was in prison, and Jesus came to him, and he was in chains. He was about to go in front of the Roman Empire to try to defend his life. And Jesus said, hey, don't even worry about what you're going to say, because in that moment, the Holy Spirit will speak through you. It'll use your lips. And so I took that to heart, and I just found about 4 or 5 encouraging scriptures because I wanted to use this opportunity on that platform for all these people that were coming on this day as a moment for them to have faith, a moment for them to have hope and believe in God. Because, thank God for my faith. That's what got me through those challenging seasons, knowing that this journey on this planet Earth is not the end. And so I remember going up on that stage. I was the last one to speak, man. I was nervous. I was shaking. And I just went on that stage, and right when I got to that podium, I just said, Holy Spirit, take the lead, man. Take the wheel. And I just remember this presence coming upon me. It was a warm feeling. It's just the ultimate peace. And I just began to preach my ass off. It's almost like God took over me. Like in the Bible when he says that Gideon was going to war, and it said that God put Gideon on like a glove. It just kind of felt the same way. And I went in for about 40 minutes. And at the end of that, the pastor comes up and he said, normally I would preach and try to give a message of hope, but Colton's already done that for me. So if there's anybody in here who'd like to give their life to God, raise your hand. And hands went up all over the room. All over the room. 40, 50 hands. And as soon as that service ended, I had a line of about 20, 30 people waiting to talk to me and saying, because of what you just said in your speech and your faith, I'm deciding to give my life to God. And remember this older man coming up right after, looking at me in my eye and saying, son, you are truly anointed. You've been given a gift. And so it was in that darkest moment of my life that my purpose was revealed. My pain, my struggle led me directly to my purpose. And so I've come to learn that the trials you encounter in life will typically introduce you to your strengths as well. Now, don't get me wrong. That was still the darkest season of my life, regardless of my faith. I didn't understand. I felt lost. I was broken. I was full-blown depressed. But I held on to hope in those seasons. There was a few scriptures that I just stood my entire faith on. In the book of Romans, where it says, for God works all things together for the good, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And the other one in Jeremiah says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I remember in those dark days when I can barely get myself out of bed, there really wasn't anything anybody could say or do to pull me out of that. And there's really not too much I can say to you either if you're going through one of these challenging seasons. And it doesn't have to be so extreme as to losing family. Perhaps it's a breakup. Perhaps it's losing your job. Perhaps it is losing somebody you loved. My only advice to you in those dark seasons is to focus on finding the light in whatever way you know how to do that. For me, every single day I listen to motivational videos. I listen to inspirational speakers. It would just light up my soul. It would give me hope. It would motivate me and encourage me. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I listened to him every day for hours a day at the gym, on runs in the car. And now I've got 4,000 to 5,000 hours of personal development, some of the greatest leaders and speakers inside of me. And when I step on a stage or I step on this podcast mic or I'm coaching a client, I regurgitate all this beautiful wisdom and all this beautiful knowledge. And if it wasn't for what I've went through, I wouldn't have this wisdom and knowledge. I wouldn't have this purpose and this calling to help heal others and expand others and help people bring their dreams to reality. And because of my faith and because of the wisdom that I had been seeking through the Bible, through my personal development, I had realized at that moment that there's seasons to life. Every storm runs out of rain eventually. Winter never lasts forever. All you got to do in those seasons is truly just hold on, because for the last 10,000 years as we know it, what follows winter is always spring. And because of this higher perspective that my faith was able to give me, I just kind of realized that life is just doing what life does. It gives and it takes. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. It's got moments of victory and it's got moments of defeat. That's part of the game. Life's not so much about avoiding the storms that happen in life, but more so learning how to dance in the rain. And because of these tribulations, I've trained myself to always see the silver lining. I know that because of what I went through, I am the man I am today. There's a quote by Carl Jung, famous philosopher from back in the day, that says that enlightenment is mandated by a pathway through hell. This higher level of consciousness, this spiritual awakening, this pathway of enlightenment, the only way to get there is through some sort of suffering, through the fire. Just as gold is refined by fire and diamonds are formed under pressure, we as humans are the same way. So after all of this happened, it was quite evident to me that I was going to pursue purpose in life, and my purpose was revealed. I knew I had a calling to speak, to inspire, to encourage, to transform lives. And I refused to just go live an average life at this point. I wanted to go down swinging, leave a legacy, do the best I can to leave my mark on this earth. But I didn't really necessarily know where to start. And I didn't want to go out there and share the story about losing a brother and father and the addiction my family dealt with. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want to be looked at as a victim. And I remember meeting this motivational speaker shortly after. And as I was talking to him, he says, "Well, Colton, what's your story?" And so I share with him exactly what I just said to you. Look, man, I love inspiring people and I want to speak, but I don't want to share this. I don't want people to know this about me. I don't want to be looked at as a victim. And I remember he looked at me and he looked me dead in my eyes and said, "Colton, stop being so insecure. This story is the platform God gave you to speak from. This is what will give you weight to your words." And that moment, that perspective shifted everything for me. I realized that I'm not a victim, but I'm a victor. I was able to overcome all of that. I just had to learn how to not stand in my story, but stand on my story. And now after coaching and after having motivational speeches for these last few years, I've actually learned that it is my story that allows me to connect with people. It's my story when I'm looking these people in the eyes that allows me to penetrate their mind and their soul and their spirit and speak directly to their heart. And so I want to sit here and tell you today that your struggle will be the gift that the world falls in love with. So in that moment, I said, screw it, man. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do some motivational speaking. I'm going to make motivational videos. And one day I'm going to be on a stage telling the story. I didn't know where to start. And so I was like, you know what? All I have is an Instagram platform. I don't have a lot of followers. I've never been a huge fan of social media, but what a beautiful way to share a message. And so I remember hearing this quote by Jim Rohn that really got me started because I was scared. I had a lot of insecurities. I didn't want to look cringe. And I remember hearing him say this quote, and he says, "If you think trying is scary, if you think trying is risky, wait until you get the bill for not trying." And at that moment, that's all I needed to hear. I surely didn't want to be 90 years old looking back thinking, man, what did I miss out on? What if I really would have pursued my purpose? What if I pursued my calling? And so I started making these motivational videos. In fact, that was the first video I made. If you think trying was risky, wait till you get the bill for not trying. And as I started to create these videos, I really didn't know who was listening. I mean, I had a couple friends who would watch these videos and be like, "Dude, I love it. Keep going." Meanwhile, I thought they were so cringe. And the beautiful thing about it is it was Christmas Eve. I had posted a video and I had an older gentleman that I really didn't know. He worked in one of the offices I currently worked on. And he reaches out to me on Christmas Eve, and he says, Colton, I just want to thank you for what you're doing and the videos that you're posting. It's really helped me go through a really dark time. And I was like, dude, that's beautiful. I didn't know this man was watching. He was 50 years old or so. And then he DMs me again. He says, would you mind meeting me for coffee? And I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. So I ended up meeting him a couple days later. He sits down at the table in front of me. He said, Colton, I just want to let you know that on Christmas Eve when I DM'd you, I was going to commit suicide and take my life that night. And as I was laying there in bed, scrolling through social media one final time, I saw your video. And after knowing your story and the pain and struggles that you went through, if you could still be this positive and have this much purpose despite everything you've gone through, then I can too. And if I had let my insecurities, my fear of judgment, my fear of criticism, my fear of looking cringe hold me back from stepping into my purpose and creating those videos and sharing my story, that man wouldn't be here today. And it wouldn't just be him who suffered. It'd be his children, and it'd be his children's children. So ultimately, the message that I receive from that and the message that I give to you is that you have to learn not so much to stand in your story, but to stand on your story. It's a choice of whether you want to be a victim or you want to be a victor. There's a quote by Napoleon Hill in the book Think and Grow Rich, in his book Outwitting the Devil. I highly recommend both of them. And he says that every adversity, every challenge, every heartbreak contains within it the seed of an equivalent advantage, the seed of an equal or greater benefit. I'm going to repeat that. Every adversity, every challenge, every heartbreak contains within it the seed of an equivalent advantage. You guys are looking at or listening to the seed right now. If I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be speaking to you today. If I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be a coach. If I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have listened to 4,000 to 5,000 hours of some of the greatest leaders and speakers. If I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't change the lives I'm changing. I wouldn't save the lives I'm going to save. And so whatever you're going through, perspective. Always remember that life is 10% what you're dealt and 90% how you deal with it. It's all perspective. And so I just hope that listening to my story, the perspective I was able to gain, the beauty in the struggle, simply inspired you, simply encouraged you, motivated you, and perhaps shifted your perspective too. Remember that life is always happening for us, not happening to us. You are the hero of your own story. In fact, you are the author. You get to determine how the story ends. And just always remember that trophies never go to the ones with a good beginning. So my prayer is that you go out there, you leave your mark, you leave a legacy, you leave it all on the table, man. We're not here for a long time, but we all have a purpose. And when you walk in purpose, you collide with destiny. Doors open for you that no man can close, and life seems to just get a lot more beautiful. I'm super grateful that each of you listen to this, and I'm just sending you so much love. If you gained something from this and felt like it really impacted you, just let me know. It really inspires me to keep on doing what I'm doing. Rate the podcast, share it with a friend. Let's keep on chasing the dream. I love y'all. The Not So Perfect Podcast. I'm your Not So Perfect host. Talk to you soon.